My initial thoughts on Christmas and Finding Roots in Nansan by Zhu Lang were that they were very different from each other. To me, Finding Roots in Nansan was a lot easier to find a meaning from the story. Finding Roots was very clear about finding one's cultural identity and where they fit in the world. Whereas Christmas focused on Ling's past relationship with an old friend, while Roots in Nansan revealed a new friendship that led to Ling's finding of a place where he felt that he belonged. Both stories reveal major things about Chinese society. To start, in Christmas, something I found interesting was how these people in the story were discussing sinology and poems on Christmas. It seemed like a very odd thing to be doing on a night that's usually focused around spending time with your family. I think Christmas presented a central theme of education. In the Cultural Revolution, one of the main focuses was to educate the middle class. I think in this story we saw some of the effects of the Cultural Revolution on Zhu Lang and his friend. They both grew up in a small village together and are now very educated in Chinese literature. Zhu Ling's friend is even a professor. A major topic discussed by the three at the dinner table were poems. Now, I usually associate poems with art and expression, but the poem that was restated in the story shared the theme of education. The poem was called The Memory, and the memory is about, one's memory and their ability to recall information. Something I found interesting was how modern Chinese poetry is usually meant to be spoken instead of sang, and how that's kind of changed over the years. I think that's kind of a product of maybe the Cultural Revolution. And I think this reveals the government's effects on art forms in China and freedom of expression. The Cultural Revolution pushed heavily for education, but also a lot of censorship arose from it, which I think is very clearly depicted in the poetry. Towards the end of the story, it is stated that the majority of sinologists are actually studying language textbooks instead of real Chinese literature. Another theme that I got from reading Christmas was how the Chinese government believed that each person could perfect themselves. This idea of perfectibility coincides with Confucianism. The dominant strain of Confucian thought stressed the perfectibility of man through self-cultivation, education, and the practice of ritual. One of the government's main functions in the Confucian state is to educate and transform the people by moral example of the emperor and his officials. The belief that the state is the moral guardian of the people and that men are perfectible is reflected in a number of institutions, historically in the merit bureaucracy or civil service, in which all officials are supposed to be selected for their moral qualities, and more recently under Mao Zedong in the style of Communist Party leadership. The treatment of deviance and the revolutionary role assigned to the peasantry in China. Oddly enough, in the story, I think the one who reflects these ideas the most is Serval, the Dutchman, who's perfected his ability of speaking the Chinese language and his cultural awareness. Now for Roots in Nansan, I think it had a very different central theme than Christmas. Roots in Nansan focused more on Ling's friendship or relationship to the earth and finding out where he belongs. Roots in Nansan reveals the expansive rural side of China that tends to be less educated and focuses more on farming. In rural areas, the ideologies are much more different than that of big cities. The old man in the story provides us with the symbolism of actually being rooted in the ground, which is kind of where the name comes from. This not only shows how he belongs in this spot on Earth, but it also shows the connection with the Earth that these people of Nansan possess. The relationship with the earth is a common ideology of Taoism. Nature connectedness in the extent to which individuals include nature as part of their identity. It includes an understanding of nature and everything it is made up of, even the parts that are not pleasing. Another huge theme I found in Roots of Nansan is the individual's relationship to society. In Roots of Nansan, Ling does not know where he is from, which creates a personal void for him. He finds this village that makes him feel like he belongs there, but he cannot stay and make a life there. That made me wonder, why is that? Like, why can't he stay there? And what I realized is that Ling cannot let go of his modern lifestyle that had been created through the Cultural Revolution. This is the harsh reality of modernization. It makes it easier for most people to find their role in society, but it's also harder to go against the norm and go backwards to a rural or simple lifestyle. China is one of the oldest continuous civilizations in history and the dominant culture center of East Asia, with flourishing philosophical, political, economic, artistic, and scientific traditions. China developed a strong cultural identity as a universalistic civilization, but is still moving in the direction of modernization. China has struggled for the last century with the challenge of forging a new identity in a world of nation states and of redefining its cultural values in a modern world. This is something that I found very relevant in the Roots in Nansan. Now to connect, to connect Roots in Nansan to other pieces of literature that we've had this semester, I think it reminded me a lot of Little Boat, because they both shared a common theme of being kind of in nature, and they both take place in rural villages which make up large parts of China. And another relation I found was to The Spirit of the Chinese People by Gu Hongming. And in The Spirit of the Chinese People, Hongming describes a new Chinaman and an old Chinaman. And I found that the old man in Roots of Nansan kind of represented the old Chinaman that Hongming was talking about. So it's someone who lives kind of a simple lifestyle, which they're connected more to the earth and they're not as preoccupied with money and kind of societal concerns or political concerns. I think the ideas in Christmas can be kind of related to the travels of Marco Polo, because they both emphasize education and kind of the importance of language in China. In Marco Polo, he's greatly respected and he's able to make all these great relations with China because he speaks the language and he's really fluent in it. He knows how to make those connections, which kind of leads to this big alliance between Italy and China that's still going on today. And another big similarity is that both of the stories, Christmas and Marco Polo, have a European foreigner who is knowledgeable in the Chinese language and respected by a lot of people in China. And I think both of these stories kind of help represent the importance of cross-cultural awareness and respecting each other's cultures. And another thing that I found that related to Christmas was the propaganda posters that we went over, because I think they kind of represented trying to make a more educated middle class and kind of working towards the modernization of China, which kind of all revolves around education. Okay, now the similarities between Christmas and Roots and Nansang were, I didn't really find much, honestly. I kind of had to reach for them. But I think that the biggest similarity was if you combine their main central themes, it kind of gives you what modern China is right now. Because Christmas has your well-educated people kind of in the urban areas, and then Roots of Nansan has your rural population and kind of the old ideologies. And then to conclude, I said that the two short stories have two very different central themes but can be related to each other through the modern Chinaman. The conversations in Christmas are the product of the expansion in China and the increased education, whereas the man in Roots and Nansan is a symbol of the old ways of China.